When I was doing research a number of years ago for my book, Killer Fish, I was stunned when they looked at the 250 most pristine waters in the world, notably in the North and South Pole, people not living, any marginal amounts of people living there. And every bit of the water had pharmaceutical drugs in it. Could you explain? You know probably more than I do. I did this much research on it.
I'm much more familiar with the northern hemisphere than I am with the southern hemisphere. And one of the things I learned while working on my book, Chasing Molecules, and I did make several trips to the Arctic for it so that I could hang out with scientists who were studying exactly what you just mentioned. And the fact is that anything that goes into the air in the northern hemisphere eventually moves north, so that the Arctic has become a sink for persistent chemicals. And the people who live in the Arctic, very sadly, and actually I'm going to be working on a story about this shortly, are carrying sort of these awful kind of triple burdens, because native communities in the far north, as many of you probably know, probably rely more on hunting and fishing for their primary food than anyone else in the world. Those marine mammals, Arctic fish, really high fat content. That's what's made them such a good, useful food source. But as you heard a lot this morning, the fat tissue is where these persistent toxic chemicals accumulate. And so the people who eat them are taking them in. They're accumulating in their bodies. And then there's the global drift that they're dealing with that's not coming from the direct food source. So it's a really serious problem.
That's interesting to me. You actually were with these scientists.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I was for a while one of them working on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And one of the things we noted was this global distillation effect that you just referred to. Fat has been called a natural hazardous waste site. As you've written, it accumulates up the food chain. So at the top of the Arctic food chain is the polar bear and the whale, and they have some of the highest residues of lipophilic organochlorines ever found in the world. At the top of the human food chain is the nursing infant. And as you've written as well, babies who have the higher levels of certain fat-loving chlorinated compounds tend to have more problems with their reproductive organs. Baby boys have smaller penises with defects and things like that. We were talking before about the fact that cell phone radiation appears to affect divalent calcium cations, and that this is such a critical thing for membrane transport throughout any living system. What do you and I have to do to get the environmental movement to step up to the plate and understand that it is absolute nonsense to talk about toxic chemical reform, like everybody's talking about now, tweaking around the Lautenberg proposal, for example, and not address the fact that we live in a sea of radio frequency radiation that has never existed in human history, and medical experts are now using that same radiation to open membranes with electroporation to deliver drugs, including chemotherapy, into the body, or in the case of ultrasound, to enhance the uptake with electrophoresis of therapeutic drugs for sore muscles, and yet deny that there's an interaction here between toxic chemicals and microwave radiation.
I am not a policy person. I am not with an NGO or an advocacy organization, but as you were talking, I was picturing some kind of informative hearing for ideally the Senate, perhaps that Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, where there are some people who are pretty smart and interested in these things, and get scientists who are working on that kind of brain chemistry, which there are, and some of the experts in the field that you've been directly researching in the radiation, which I don't know very much about, and have them explain that these interactions are exacerbating the chemical environmental health exposures that everybody is spending so much time talking about it, And the thing that appears so persuasive, as you well know, to the most number of people is this having an effect on children's health? Is the fact that so many children, and I travel far more than I should, and I'm constantly absolutely horrified watching all these small children who have been given, iPad-type tablets just to play with all the time. Is this having an effect on children's health? Is there something that you can bring to the fore? Because for lots of reasons, if you can include children's health in the conversation, suddenly it's not a political issue. You don't have an industry as often trying to slice and dice. I don't know. That would be my...
That actually makes me think of something that I realize is not a proof of causation, but it is a fact that South Korea, which is one of the earliest adopters and the highest saturation rates of wireless devices, not only has an official diagnosis by neuropsychiatrists there of digital dementia, but also has a rate of autism that is...
Repeat that word.
Digital dementia is a diagnostic category by neuropsychiatrists in South Korea that refers to the fact that the right brain is underdeveloped and confirmed as such in children, young children, who have been using digital devices from young ages. And that means, among other things, they lack empathy, they lack the ability to look you in the eye, to integrate thinking, to anticipate the consequences of their action, and control their impulses. So it's potentially huge. In addition, that country has a reported rate of autism that is 3 times higher than ours.
And that's high. And the other thing that I'm curious about, which I've been hearing about anecdotally from friends and family who teach in elementary schools, is that the current generation of children who spend so much time on screens and particularly touch screens are lacking in basic fine motor skills, bad with scissors. My sister teaches art.
Yes.
They're bad with scissors, can't draw, can't do pinching motions. And I'm wondering if this is both physical and physiological.
Right. There's absolutely a neurodevelopmental axis here that develops. Children need to look you in the eye. They need to learn how to take those fat, stubby fingers and take a crayon and control its motion. And if they don't learn how to write and draw at a young age, we have an epidemic of, particularly of males, who cannot write. They cannot write their letters, some of them 7, 8, 9 years of age, because they become keyboarders. Remember when it was called typing? That's when women did it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? Keyboarding, okay? And these little kids grow up keyboarding, and their parents are so proud. You look on YouTube, you can search iPad 5-month-old, and you'll see several YouTube videos of parents laughing as their babies are screaming when they withdraw the iPad that the babies are playing with. And they think it's funny.